Vigraham Vai Yeshavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namamaha. We bow before Sri Ramakrishna, the worshipful Lord, stainless, eternal, of infinite form, who took human form out of compassion for all living beings. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning I want to speak about Sri Ramakrishna and more specifically about the future of Sri Ramakrishna. And that is because, or the reason for speaking about him today is that this coming Saturday we'll celebrate his birth anniversary. And so it's most appropriate to speak about him today. From one standpoint, what I speak about and what any of our Swamis speak about is always from Sri Ramakrishna, inspired by Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda and the Holy Mother, of course. But don't often speak about Sri Ramakrishna himself. And that is in line with Swami Vivekananda's own teaching, that he wanted the principles for which Sri Ramakrishna lived to be emphasized. He said that the great mistake of past religions was that they emphasized the founder of the religion more than the principles for which the teacher lived. And so people would insist on others accepting the founder. And even if you accept the founder, then you're a good follower, and it doesn't matter so much what you do, but you must accept the founder. And so he didn't want that to happen to Sri Ramakrishna. He also didn't want the power which Sri Ramakrishna had brought to earth to be locked up in a temple. He said in India to his brother disciples and disciples, he said that this place, Belur Mutt, should not become a Thakur Badi. That is a Bengali expression meaning a temple where you go and make offerings. And not that he had anything against temples, but he felt that the power which Sri Ramakrishna had brought to the earth was meant for all beings, whether you go to a temple or don't go to a temple. And he didn't want that power locked up in a temple and guarded and kept away from people by priests and or monks. That the power which Sri Ramakrishna had brought was for everyone. And so he fought against the tendency, which was strong in the beginning, tendency to put all of the emphasis into ritual worship and into the establishment of temples. Nowadays in India, in our ashramas, because Sri Ramakrishna is widely accepted, you find temples going up everywhere. But a generation ago, when I was a young monk, it was extremely difficult to get permission from headquarters to build a temple. They didn't want temples. They wanted the emphasis to be on serving people and spreading the ideas. And so, as you know, Swami Vivekananda spoke only twice publicly about Sri Ramakrishna in the West. In India, he would mention his name as an illustration of his the principles he was teaching, and as an illustration of Vedanta. But in the West, he only spoke twice out of the many, many lectures he gave on a variety of topics. He only spoke twice on Sri Ramakrishna, once in New York and once in London. And again, that was not because he didn't think Sri Ramakrishna was important. No, he himself said that in time, the whole world would come to appreciate Sri Ramakrishna. But he said, whether people worship him or not, it doesn't matter to Sri Ramakrishna. He came for the welfare of others. As that verse that I chanted in the beginning, a very well-known verse says, he who took birth out of compassion for living beings. That's why he took birth. He didn't take birth because he wanted people to offer him rasagolas in temples, because he happened to like rasagolas. Actually, he liked jalebis even more. But he didn't come so that people would offer him jalebis or rasagolas or anything else. He came for the welfare of others. And as Swami Vivekananda said, neither he, Vivekananda, nor Ramakrishna came for name and fame. And it doesn't matter whether one worships him or not, that he came to establish Dharma, that is, to bring Dharma to the world, to bring religion and righteousness and spirituality to the world. And but Swami Vivekananda also knew and said that in time, when people learn the principles for which Sri Ramakrishna came, then they'll naturally wonder, has anyone ever embodied these principles? And then, of course, they will see Sri Ramakrishna as the embodiment of the principles which have been taught. And that type of acceptance would be good and beneficial. But obviously, to put it in somewhat humorous frame, he didn't want people going around ringing people's doorbells and asking if they had found their personal savior in Sri Ramakrishna. He didn't want that sort of using Sri Ramakrishna to beat people over the head into submission. But for people to, of their own volition, of their own intelligence, their own perception, to come and see that these principles for which he lived are good, they're true, they're beneficial, and therefore I accept them. So that's why, though what we teach is always in some sense inspired by Sri Ramakrishna, if what we teach is true, we don't always speak about Sri Ramakrishna because for these considerations. But whenever his birth anniversary has come, then of course it's most appropriate to speak about him because there are many people who are very attracted to Sri Ramakrishna. And so it's natural that we speak about the person also once in a while. And especially at the time of his birth anniversary, at other times like Kalpataru Day, the 1st of January, when he gave illumination to many of his followers. So let me begin the actual talk by asking the question, was Sri Ramakrishna an incarnation of God? Was he an avatar? Many people present him as an avatar, as an incarnation of God. And was he such, and does it really matter? Well, first let me answer the last question. No, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter whether one thinks of him as an incarnation of God, an avatara. We should never try to put him in the competition for avatarhood. As Swami Vivekananda said after a trip to Dhaka, and I believe it was 1901, when he came back from Dhaka, he said, right now in Dhaka, I forget how many there were, but something like 10 different incarnations in Dhaka. That is, 10 different people who are claiming to be incarnations of God. That has become a weakness in Hinduism. It's not necessary in Hinduism. It's not when Hinduism was strong, but it is a modern weakness of Hinduism, that anyone, in order to become a teacher, feels that they have to claim special birth. And so you find at any given time nowadays there are a number of incarnations of God. And so to put Sri Ramakrishna in that company, that somebody we're trying to raise him up in people's estimation by claiming he's an avatar, he's an avatar, he's an avatar, you have to worship our avatar, he's the avatar of the age and all of that, that's an insult to Sri Ramakrishna. That's why Swami Vivekananda once said, when someone asked him, Swamiji, do you believe that Sri Ramakrishna was an incarnation of God? And Swamiji said, the incarnation of God, as that term is usually understood nowadays, would be an insult to apply it to Sri Ramakrishna. And that was his estimation of Sri Ramakrishna, that we shouldn't put him in the competition for avatarhood. But many people do consider him. And Swamiji, on another occasion, someone asked him, Swamiji, the same question, basically, Swamiji, do you believe that Sri Ramakrishna was an incarnation of God? And Swamiji said, what to speak of belief? That's a very small thing. I know that he was an incarnation of God. And so he gave both answers. And so harmonizing the two answers is easy if we just understand that when he said that avatar as it's usually understood, to apply that to Sri Ramakrishna would be an insult, means what he said, as it's commonly understood. For someone like Gandhiji, who was a great man, but people started trying to claim him as an avatar also, which he never claimed. And so, again, that tendency to, whenever you see a great person to claim that they're an avatar, that's a great weakness. It said, this is a tangent, but it said in China that even the deities had to have a human past, because in China they were very humanistic. Man, the human being, was the center of the universe and was the judge of all things. So even a deity had to have a human past, whereas in India, human had to have a divine past, and because God was the center of everything, where God was the measure of all things. So an interesting comparison of the civilizations. But again, coming to the question, was he an avatar, and why did Swami Vivekananda say, yes, what to speak of belief, I know that he was an avatar. The idea of avatar was historically somewhat slow to come to India. And of course, it was the first place in the world that it arose, and so it was slow to come to the world and to India where it first arose. Much later it came to the idea of Christ, perhaps through Indian influence, that we don't know for sure, but perhaps through Indian influence, because those ideas don't grow on trees, where one idea seeds another idea. So in the Vedas, you don't find the idea of the incarnation of God. You find it arising in the Mahabharata with the Sri Krishna, and then and of course Sri Ram, who is before him. But with the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and then the Vishnu Purana and the Puranic age, you find that the development of the idea of the incarnation of God came. And so, looking at the life of Sri Ramakrishna, and looking at what Sri Ramakrishna said about himself, you see that the extraordinary spiritual power that he had, extraordinary power, an ordinary illumined soul, who has attained through effort and through sadhana, or through the grace of God, the highest attainment, the highest enlightenment, then they can bless many people in their lifetime. And many people get inspiration from them in coming generations until their memory begins to fade. But they influence a fair number of people in their lifetime, and some people after their life through inspiration and so forth. But an incarnation is one who comes and sets a new course for the whole world, who sets the world on a new historical course, or at least a region of the world. In past ages, it was a region of the world. In modern times, because of mass communication and transportation, we find that there's the idea Swamiji had, that, and Sri Ramakrishna also, that the power he had brought would usher in a new era for the world itself. And so an incarnation is an illumined soul, yes, but one who has extraordinary power, and who can give liberation in their lifetime to many, many people, and who after they pass away, they continue to grant liberation to people. And their work continues after their passing away. The work for which they came to earth, that continues. And they retain an enlightened sense of personhood, like Ishvara, like the deities, like Shiva, Kali, Durga, etc. They continue an enlightened sense of personhood that can be approached through prayer and worship, and who can continue to bless us and can continue to inspire us and communicate with us. And so Sri Ramakrishna was considered an incarnation because of the extraordinary spiritual power that he had, the extraordinary physical and mental capacities which he had. The type of spiritual practice and spiritual realizations which Sri Ramakrishna had in his lifetime would destroy the body of an ordinary person, even a very pure person. Even a very pure person couldn't withstand the tremendous experiences and spiritual practice that Sri Ramakrishna underwent. And so it's for that reason, it's believed that he was born without karma. We're born with a karmically tainted body. And if we work hard and we come to illumination, yes, we attain to illumination. That is open to everyone to attain to illumination. But there's only a certain capacity that we have because of the weakness of the body, the mind, and the nerves. But Sri Ramakrishna, for 12 years, he didn't sleep. 12 years he didn't sleep. And even after that, people said that he would lie down for a short time late at night, but only for a short time. And even then, it didn't seem that he was sleeping. And so to sustain that type of spiritual practice he did for 12 years, the intensity of it, and the spiritual experiences he had, that's not open to an ordinary soul. And so again, he was considered by many, or is considered by many, to be an incarnation of God. But whether one believes that or not, that's neither here nor there. That's something that people come to their own estimation. Swami Vivekananda said that even for membership in the Ramakrishna order, whether one accepts him as a great guru, as a great teacher, prophet, incarnation, saint, whatever, doesn't matter, as long as one appreciates the principles for which he lived. That if you take those as the principles that you want to live for, then you're fit to be, or you're qualified from that standpoint, a doctrinal standpoint, to be a member of the order. So whether one accepts him or not, that's a personal matter. But the reasons why many do accept him are, again, because of his tremendous spiritual power and the fact that his work continues and that he continues to be seen by people and continues to answer prayers and respond to worship and continues to inspire people around the world. Swami Ritajananda, I know several stories, but I'll just tell one that you've probably never heard before. Swami Ritajanandaji, who was a great Swami, a very highly spiritual Swami, who was in charge of our center in France for several decades. He said that once in France, some gypsies from the south of France came to see him. And they told him that, Swami, we believe, the gypsy community in the south of France, we believe that Sri Ramakrishna is going to be born among us the next time he comes. And so first of all, Swami Ritajanandaji was surprised they even knew about Sri Ramakrishna. And that then among the gypsies, there was this belief that he would be born among them. And they said, well, it's because he said that in the future he would be born to the northwest, and we are northwest of where he was, among minstrels, and we are minstrels. And so we believe he will be born among us. So it doesn't matter whether that actually happens or not, but the fact that these people far removed from any center of the order and swamis and all of that, that they themselves had come to this. Well, let me tell you one other story I've told here before, a long time back, about a man I knew, Eugene Condon, in Kansas City, Missouri, who, just the short version of the story, his life was in a state of misery. He was a drunkard. He used to get into barroom brawls on a regular basis, and it was his wife was in a state of desperation, trying to get him to clean up his life. And so one day he saw, I always forget whether it was I think it was his sister's house. He saw the picture of Sri Ramakrishna on the wall. He'd never seen Sri Ramakrishna, never heard of him. And suddenly, even before he saw the picture, he was sitting in the living room. He felt the waves of love pouring over him, washing him clean and pure. And he looked to see where that feeling of waves of love was coming from. And he saw that on her wall a picture of Sri Ramakrishna, and saw that from there these waves of love were coming. And so then he asked her when she came out who this was, and she told him it's Sri Ramakrishna. And then he eventually met Swami Satprakashananda and became a devotee. I knew him when he was in his 80s, and a great devotee he became, a wonderful man. And so Sri Ramakrishna carries on his own work. And so it's because of that that he is considered by many to be an incarnation. Now, when we look at incarnations, we usually look to their past, their life and their teachings, etc. But today's talk is about the future of Sri Ramakrishna. So looking to their past, to their life, and to their work, that of course is natural and that's important. It's there that we find out who they were, how they lived, what they taught, what their message is, and all of that. That's what all of us do and what we should do if we take an interest in them. But Swami Vivekananda, who was born for the very purpose, as Sri Ramakrishna said, and as Swami Vivekananda eventually realized, he was born for the very purpose of putting the power or channeling the power which Sri Ramakrishna had brought to earth into channels for the good of humanity. And for that, he had to know history, and he had to know the present situation of the world, and he had to look to the future also, to know what it was that the world needed and where the world needed to go for its own benefit. So Swami Vivekananda looked at the future also. So now when I talk about the future of Sri Ramakrishna, first I have to explain what I mean by his future. So by his future, I don't mean just the person, Sri Ramakrishna, who looked like that, who lived in Dakshineshwar and who continues his mission. Yes, that's part of it. But I mean much more than just the man, Sri Ramakrishna, by his future. Because, as Swami Vivekananda explains in his lecture, Christ the Messenger, given in California, he says that from time to time, at great intervals in history, you find a huge wave pouring through history. And on the crest of the wave, you find the great man. And he was talking about Christ as the crest of a wave which washed through history. But the same was true of all of the incarnations, that they ride a wave sitting on top of a wave. And the wave itself is the phenomenon. The man at the top is that which embodies the wave, the power of the wave, is the emblem of the body of the wave. But the wave itself is the power which sweeps through history. Swami Vivekananda doubted, he didn't say that he knew, but he doubted that Christ was historical, as we know the life of Christ. But he said that there's no doubt that there was a manifestation of power which descended to earth, or which passed through history at that time, is a better way of keeping the analogy of a wave which passed through history in the area where Christ is said to have lived. And that is what we know as Christ. Whether the life as we have it in the Bible is true or not, Swamiji said, doesn't matter. And he said it may be true, it may not be true. He had reasons for doubting its historicity, but he didn't say that he could prove that it was not historical, but he doubted it. But he said that the truth of the incarnation of Jesus is undoubted because of the power which you see manifested and which had a tremendous effect on history and continues to affect history. And so the incarnation is more than just the person that we see. There's this wave of spiritual power which the person is the embodiment of. And so we're speaking about the whole phenomenon when we speak about the future of Sri Ramakrishna. And the work and the self-revelation of Sri Ramakrishna, of this wave of power which swept through history and continues to sweep through history, has just begun. As the work of Sri Ramakrishna has just begun. The self-revelation of Sri Ramakrishna has just begun. The disciples, to again take the analogy of Jesus, the disciples of Jesus, they worshipped Jesus. They knew him as the Son of God, but they certainly didn't know what history was going to bring. They knew him as the great teacher that they worshipped. But what was going to come with Christianity for the next 1,500 years, when Christianity was a rising force, That they couldn't know. And so with Sri Ramakrishna, he lived that tremendous life. But even now, we don't understand the full significance of that. We're only beginning to understand just a tiny little bit of it. It will take centuries for that to unfold itself. So the power which he brought and the self-revelation of who he was and what he did, that will take many, many centuries to unfold. So by the future of Sri Ramakrishna, I mean all of that, not just the person who was born as Sri Ramakrishna, the whole phenomenon. So hence the future of Sri Ramakrishna can be seen from several different standpoints. Speaking of Sri Ramakrishna, the man, there's several things that we can say. He himself said that he would come again. He himself said that he would come again. Different versions are reported. The usually accepted one is that he would come again in 200 years. But my own belief, and I always warn people, that we shouldn't take that in a mathematical sense, that in 200 years he's going to be born again, 200 years from whenever he said it. By 200 years, he probably meant some centuries into the future. And Swami Vivekananda believed that after Sri Ramakrishna incarnated again, then the one who had been born as Sri Ramakrishna would merge into the infinite. At this point, Swami Vivekananda said that Sri Ramakrishna continues in his subtle body, his sukshma sharira, his subtle body, and he lives at Bellermutt. But we have to understand that in a special way. That doesn't mean living at Bellermutt the way we might live at Bellermutt. that he's living there and going to the dining hall 3 times a day and doing various things, etc. However, there are people who have seen Sri Ramakrishna at Bellermutt. Swami Nirvanananda said that he would see every morning in the early morning, long before dawn, when he would wake up in the early hours of the pre-dawn hours of the morning, he would look out his window, which looked across to the temple of Sri Ramakrishna, and there he would see Sri Ramakrishna standing on the balcony outside of Sri Ramakrishna's bedroom in the temple. Even workers working in the basement of the temple where Sri Ramakrishna's ashes have been kept. There was a worker who was scared to death because he saw in the basement Sri Ramakrishna. And he was not a saintly person. He was just an ordinary hired worker. Common laborer, but he didn't want to go down into the basement anymore because to him it was seeing Sri Ramakrishna's ghost. And a variety of people have seen Sri Ramakrishna at Bellermutt. And so in some sense, which is difficult to understand, Sri Ramakrishna continues in his subtle body at Bellermutt. But again, not in the sense that we think of, that he's limited to Bellermutt. No, Sri Ramakrishna, having identified with God, is everywhere. But in a special sense, he resides at Bellermutt. And the Swami Vivekananda used to say that from there until his next incarnation, he continues to send out universal ideas around the world, which will uplift humanity. So one of the reasons I don't think we should take 200 years literally is that Swami Vivekananda believed that Sri Ramakrishna would remain at Bellermutt until his next incarnation, sending out universal ideas for the good of humanity. And if he's just going to do that for 200 years at Bellermutt, then it's almost over. And then if after that next incarnation, he merges into the infinite. Because Sri Ramakrishna had said that when he comes again, many, many people will be liberated. But those who don't get it that time will have to wait for a long time. And so all of these ideas fit together. But a 200-year range just doesn't seem to make sense to me. So I don't say that I know that that's wrong, but it doesn't seem to make sense to me if you take it in a mathematical sense. So again, the Jiva of Sri Ramakrishna, the man who was born as Sri Ramakrishna, sitting in the Bellermutt, again, sitting in his subtle form, not sitting as we think of it in a chair or whatever. But what does that mean for the rest of the world? As I said, he's being identified with God, he's all pervasive. That's not as difficult to understand as it might seem, because we always take space to be real. We take space to be real and extension to be real. And so Bellermutt is 10,000 miles away from us now. So Sri Ramakrishna is 10,000 miles away. No. As Swami Vivekananda said, and as is consistent with the Vedanta, everything is right here, right now. It's the mind that expands out everything into space. But all souls, as Swami Vivekananda writes in a beautiful letter to Mrs. Bull after her father died, all souls are right here, right now, in a geometrical point. So all souls are in the same place. Where I am, all souls are. Where your soul is, all souls are. That all souls are in the same place. And so Sri Ramakrishna is seated in Bellermutt. Yes, in terms of external space, there may be a special manifestation, and no doubt is a special manifestation of Sri Ramakrishna there. But that is at the heart of the universe itself. And so in terms of geographical space here, there's a special manifestation there, but that reaches everywhere, and everything is contained within that. And so from there, Sri Ramakrishna will send out universal ideas. And what does that mean? What does it mean that he's sending out universal ideas? Again, as Swami Vivekananda said on another occasion, not about Sri Ramakrishna, but about the power of ideas. He said that even if you go into a cave and lock the door, you close, of course, a cave usually doesn't have a door. You put a stone in front of it and lock yourself into the cave, block yourself into the cave, and there think one true thought. He said that thought will penetrate through the walls of the cave and fall over the world as a blessing, and that it will have its fruit. So even if you go into a cave, you never talk to anyone, and there you pass away after thinking one good, true thought for the welfare of others, that thought will bear its fruit. Because the walls of the cave are no barrier to ideas, that those ideas will penetrate the cave and spread over the world. So Sri Ramakrishna is not that he's sitting at Bellermutt, first of all, not that he's seated in a chair there, sometimes crossing his legs and sometimes uncrossing them, and that he's trying to think up thoughts, okay, what am I going to think about today? And I'm going to send it out to the world. No, it's his realizations, the vision of Sri Ramakrishna, the universal ideas which he embodied. So it's not that he's thinking things in Bellermutt, it's that those ideas which he embodies, that those are radiating out constantly over the world. And you find people here and there catching those ideas. And so that you find, like the ideas which Swami Vivekananda taught when he was traveling in America, those, as he said, and as Holy Mother said, that was Sri Ramakrishna speaking through Swamiji. And you find that the ideas he gave at the Parliament of Religions, those were revolutionary ideas at the time. To tell people in America at that time, in the 1890s, 1893, that you were not sinners. It's a sin to call a man so. That is standing liable on human nature. That you were all spirits, immortal, blessed, and free. That you were divine. You were pure by nature. What a shock that would have been to Americans at that time. To say that all religions are true and that we worship with all religions, that would have been a shock. Because even now, many people believe that if one religion is true, the others have to be false because they teach different things. And various other ideas that Swamiji gave, even in his first talks at the Parliament of Religions, they were revolutionary ideas. And yet, you find those ideas springing up everywhere in America now. Not as the only idea, but you find them springing up in places that, again, we haven't gone and actively preached and taught as Vedantists. You find that in Christianity itself, among theologians, there's those who are uninfluenced by, externally at least, by Vedanta. You find the search for a new view of human nature, Instead of seeing human beings as born in sin, to look for a new positive view of human nature. You find in many places in Christianity this view growing that different religions are true. Yes, it may not be the dominant idea yet, but it is becoming such. I myself have experienced that a number of times. Like once when in the Hindu tradition of sannyasa, you're not to go home as a sannyasi for until 12 years. You're not to visit your birthplace. If you want to visit it, you don't go for 12 years. So after 12 years, I'd just come back from living in India for 7 years. So I went to see my parents. And while I was there, a neighbor across the street came to see my mother. She didn't know I was there visiting, but I had known her when I was a little kid. She knew me. And so when she saw me, she was surprised to see me there. She hadn't heard anything about me for years, so she asked what I was doing. And so I knew that she was an evangelical, very conservative Christian, a very, very conservative evangelical. And so I was going to tell her, but I knew that, here it comes now. She's going to weep for my soul and all of that. So I told her, well, I'm a Hindu monk. And she said, oh, that's wonderful. I believe that all of us who worship the same God. I thought, my God, that's Miss Koistra? That's not the same Miss Koistra I used to know. And then once when I was in Berkeley, the Swami asked me to meet with a Christian seminary student who was coming to visit the Berkeley Temple as part of his religious education. They were to visit one other place of worship, non-Christian place of worship, as part of their training. So he came, and he was from a very conservative denomination. And so I talked with him and showed him around and everything. And then I found that he was open to everything. In fact, he even asked me, do you believe in reincarnation? And I said, well, that's not a dogma that one has to believe in order to be a Vedantist. But most people find that it fits with the ideas naturally. And yes, I personally do believe in reincarnation. And he said, I do too. It's not part of our doctrine, but I believe in it also, because it's the only thing that makes sense to me. And so in many, many ways, I found that these ideas which Swamiji spoke of, which were so radical and which were so new, that you find them springing up in strange places. When I've done a lot of interreligious dialogue with people, teachers of different traditions, and in America in particular, where I've done that, you'll be amazed. Sometimes you'll hear a Jewish rabbi saying that, well, in Judaism, we have karma yoga, but we also have Raja yoga and Jnana yoga. He's speaking in terms of the yogas to a general audience. He's not speaking to a Vedantic audience, but he's speaking to a general audience. You'll find a Sufi Muslim imam saying that, well, we have Raja yoga and it's like this in the Sufi path, and we have Jnana yoga, which is like this in the Sufi path, and so forth. These ideas springing up in different places where you would least expect them. And so Sri Ramakrishna sitting in Bellarmut, radiating out universal ideas. Again, it's not that he's sitting there thinking like the, what's his name? Rodin, the thinker, yes. Rodin is the thinker. And trying to think out thoughts and coming up with a new one every day. But no, just immersed in samadhi, immersed in his realization, these ideas radiating out from him. In a effortless, thoughtless way, thoughtless in the sense of not having to think about it, just radiating out of his realization. So there's Sri Ramakrishna the man, there's Sri Ramakrishna the influence of the man, which still continues. There's still people in different parts of the world who are inspired. I told recently the story of when I went to Egypt and went to the university in Cairo, Al-Azhar University, the largest Islamic university in the world and the oldest continuing university in the world. There were universities before that in India, but that no longer continue. But this is the oldest continuing university, older than Oxford and the University of Paris, etc. I met the head of the theology department, and when he heard that I was from the Ramakrishna mission, to an interpreter, he suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he asked if he could speak to me privately. And so he went away with the interpreter and he asked me, "Is that the Ramakrishna mission of Swami Vivekananda?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Oh, I'm so in love with Swami Vivekananda. I read his works. I've never met someone who actually follows the Swami." And so here in Cairo, the head of the Islamic theology department telling me and being so delighted to meet someone who was a follower of Swami Vivekananda. So Sri Ramakrishna, his work includes the work of Swami Vivekananda and Holy Mother, and their work includes the work of Sri Ramakrishna. It's interpenetrating work, but that continues in this way. And so there's the work of Sri Ramakrishna also, besides the man which I spoke about before. Let me continue more with the work of Sri Ramakrishna. That Swami Vivekananda said, as I've said from time to time, that with the birth of Sri Ramakrishna, the Satya Yuga began. The Satya Yuga, the golden age, the age where spirituality becomes widespread, where many people attain to illumination, many people are spiritually awakened. He also said that this time Sri Ramakrishna has awakened the Brahma Kundalini. The Brahma Kundalini, that is the Kundalini of the whole world. Sri Ramakrishna had awakened. So in past incarnations, they had awakened spiritual power within a certain region for some time. But he said this time Sri Ramakrishna has awakened the Brahma Kundalini, the Kundalini of the whole world, and that the Satya Yuga has been ushered in. So when we look around us now and when we listen to the news, whether it's in the US or in India or in Africa or anywhere else, it certainly does not look like the Satya Yuga. But the yugas are long expanses of time, and they take time. Changing from one to the other doesn't happen like that. That one day you're in the Kali Yuga and you wake up the next morning and you say, "What happened? It's suddenly the Satya Yuga today." No, it doesn't happen that way. And when there's change from one yuga to another, there's a lot of disturbance in the world, because the old has to die before the new can take birth. I've told you before here of the wonderful vision that Swami Advaitananda ji had, a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, Buro Gopal, old elderly Gopal. Long after Sri Ramakrishna had passed away, he saw in a vision that Sri Ramakrishna was coming down the path towards him, and but he knew it was Sri Ramakrishna, and yet he didn't recognize him because it didn't look like the Sri Ramakrishna he had known. This Sri Ramakrishna was big and strong and muscular and carrying a military mace on his shoulder. And so Swami Advaitananda asked, "Thakur, who are you?" So he asked him, "Thakur, who are you?" He recognized that he was Thakur, but he didn't recognize him. So he said, "Who are you?" And Sri Ramakrishna answered, "I am Gadadhara." As you know, Sri Ramakrishna's childhood name was Gadadhar, and his father had had a vision in the temple in Gaya, the Gadadhar temple in Gaya, in which Gadadhar Vishnu appeared to his father and said, "I want to be born as your son." And Sri Ramakrishna always said that he would never go to Gaya, because if he did, he would merge back into the deity and never return. And so he says in the vision to Advaitananda, in answer to his question, I'm Gadadhara, come to destroy the old so that the new can arise. And so that is the idea, that I've come to destroy the old order. And that we see breaking all around us now. We see the old order breaking all around us. And so that is part of what Sri Ramakrishna's work is. And that's what will allow the Satya Yuga to flower. So the process, as Swami Vivekananda said, has begun with the birth of Sri Ramakrishna. Swami Vivekananda said that when you boil water, you see a bubble here, a bubble there, once in a while a bubble, and then the bubbles get more until finally you come to the whole pot is just a mass of bubbling, boiling water. So he says the world is like that through time, that at first you find a great soul here, you find a great soul there, at some later interval, after 500 years, another great soul, a great teacher. But in time, the thing becomes boiling with people attaining to illumination. He said that time would come to the world. And he believed that it would come as the fulfillment of the power Sri Ramakrishna had brought. When many, many people will attain to illumination, many people will be awakened spiritually. And of course, that is the fulfillment of the idea of the awakening of the Brahma Kundalini. So that we're only seeing the very beginnings of that. But that was what Swamiji said the future would bring. He said that Sri Ramakrishna said that he had many devotees in foreign lands. That was before before Vivekananda had come to the West, or anyone else had come to the West or to other countries. But he said that he saw that he had many devotees in foreign lands. So then let me just deal a little bit with his message before we close. What his message was, because that was the center of his work. The work that he's doing is centered in his message. His work is to spread his message, to bring his message to all people for the good of people. Again, not by beating people over the head with a name that you have to believe in Sri Ramakrishna, no. It doesn't matter whether everybody even recognizes where these ideas have come from, but it's the ideas which are important, and those Sri Ramakrishna is spreading even as we speak. So one of course, the most obvious part of his message that everyone recognizes is the harmony of religions. That he lived in his own life, practiced different disciplines of Hinduism, a number of different disciplines in Hinduism, came to the full realization of the end of those paths, and then he practiced Islam. He didn't practice Christianity, but he had a revelation of the truth of Christianity, and he had the direct experience of Christ, and through Christ he realized the absolute, and knew that Christ also had taught a path that led to the absolute, as Islam did. So he came to his Jatomat Totopat. There's many faiths, so many paths, that whatever your faith, through that faith you can attain to the absolute. And so he came to the idea of universal religion, that the religion is universal, and that people do it in different ways. That was the original Vedic view of religion, that there were not religions. As Swamiji said, the idea that there are different religions was brought into India by the Buddhists, who said, we're not like you. We reject the Vedas, and we reject all that the Vedas stand for, and we have our own thing. And so that was the beginning of the idea in India that there are different religions. But the Vedic idea had been that the religion is one, and people do it in different ways. Ekam sad, truth is one. Vipra bahudha varanti. Sages call it by different names. And so that grand truth of the Vedas was at the heart of Hinduism. And so Swami Vivekananda said that he spoke about a universal religion, but not in the sense that most people speak about a universal religion. For instance, the followers of Christianity feel that that is the universal religion because everybody should follow it because it's true. The followers of Islam feel that Islam is the universal religion because it's the true religion and everyone should follow it. So not in that sense a universal religion. Swami Vivekananda said that if there is to be a universal religion in the future, it will have to be as broad as the God that it teaches. It will have to make room for everyone, and every stage of growth, and every aspect of spiritual endeavor. So the universal religion which Swamiji taught, based on Sri Ramakrishna's own life, was one which made room for everyone and made room for every religious tendency. So it's not a universal religion in the sense that we have the truth and everybody has to join us or die. Everyone has to join us or they go to hell. Everyone has to join us or they will live in error. That has been the dominant theme of most religions, even in Buddhism. A great tradition with many wonderful things, but even there, the idea is that, well, other religions are good, let them continue, but eventually they'll have to become Buddhist in order to attain enlightenment, because it's only through Buddhism that enlightenment can be had. So that tendency is there in all religions, but Sri Ramakrishna again showed the universality of religion, and Swami Vivekananda felt that that would be the birth of a new universal religion, which would be universal because it includes everyone already. It's not something that you have to join. It's something that you are already part of. And so the harmony of all standpoints, Swami Vivekananda carried even further. He said that not just that all religions are true, but he said that from his original talks at the Parliament of Religions, 1893, and said it a number of times through his message, he said that always remember that man travels not from error to truth, but from truth to truth. That everyone is seeing the universe from their own perspective, but we're seeing the same thing, but we see it in our own way. And so everyone's view of the universe has an aspect of truth. So I may not be a Marxist, but I can see that Marx also was seeing something which was true. I may not be a Freudian, but I can see that Freud saw something which is true. And so this is a view which goes even beyond the harmony of all religions, but the harmony of all viewpoints, that everyone has a truth to speak. And so the harmony of religions and the harmony of all viewpoints. That yes, there is a hierarchy, there is an ultimate perception of the non-dual truth itself, wherein all of these viewpoints are seen from a standpoint of non-duality. But that everyone is working their way towards that, and let everyone do it in their own way at their own speed. Of course, there was also Sri Ramakrishna's message of renunciation. Holy Mother, when she was asked, was Sri Ramakrishna's message religious harmony? And Holy Mother said, I never felt that Sri Ramakrishna had set out to teach religious harmony. But at the heart of Sri Ramakrishna's life was, she said, renunciation. Was renunciation. That never in the world have we seen such such perfect renunciation as seen in Sri Ramakrishna. So what is the value of that to us? Those of us who have to live in the world with responsibilities and so forth. We have to have a house to provide for dependents. We have to have money to pay bills and so forth. So what does Sri Ramakrishna's renunciation mean to us? He is a sign in the modern world that lust and greed are not the goals of life. Those are not the goals of life. That yes, we all have our desires and ambitions and all of that. Do that, but know that that is not the end of life. Do what you need to do in life, but know what the purpose of life is. And so he stands shining as a light, saying that the goal of life is the attainment of God. Nothing else, nothing else. In an age when Marx on the economic side and Freud on the psychological side were the two luminaries of the 20th century, the 19th and 20th century, Marx saying that the basic motivating factor in life is economic. That's what drives people is economic. No, Sri Ramakrishna says, no, that's not what drives human life. And he exemplifies it in his life. And Freud, who said that the basic impulses, desire for sex and for other physical enjoyment, that's the basic motivating force in life. No, that's not the basic motivating drive. No matter how strong it is, no matter how deeply seated it is, that's not the purpose of life. So if we know that that's not the purpose in life, it doesn't mean that suddenly everyone's going to become like Sri Ramakrishna and give everything up. No. But it means that I do what I have to do in my life, but I know that the purpose is something else. The purpose is something else. That's not where the purpose is. If society teaches you as it does every day through newspapers, magazines, billboards, television advertisements, YouTube, internet, everything is teaching you constantly that the goal of life is sense gratification, that's the goal of life. The highest thing that you can have is sense gratification. Then society comes to believe it because you hear it day and night, day and night. But Sri Ramakrishna stands there as a light saying, no, that's not the goal of life. That's not the goal of life. Yes, they're the four aims of life, including gratification of sense desire, possession, dharma, and liberation. But gratification of sense desire and possession, they have to be based on dharma. That is, on spirituality. Then they will help you, lead you forward, and they want to become the center of your life, the obsessive center of your life. So yes, have what you want, enjoy what you want, but know that those are passing experiences. You can't just give them up because you want to give them up. No, have them. But if you know behind all of that no, this is not the goal, you find that you've put a wedge between yourself and them. If you don't have that wedge, then you're just absorbed. We become obsessed. And so with that wedge, I know that no, I have to do what I need to do. I have to work with myself, but I know that the goal of life is something else. So let me work on that also, because that's the way I'm eventually going. Let me just say a little bit on another point, and that is part of his message, which is what we're concluding with now, his message of vijnana. And again, these ideas will go on radiating out through the world. Let me say again on that the renunciation side, Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna showed how renunciation is something we're practicing already. We all practice it. We all have to practice it. Sri Ramakrishna just showed it in its perfection. That if a child wants to go to school, and of course children, it's not really so much if they want to go to school, but when they have to go to school, then suddenly the chance they have just to sit at home and do whatever they want to and play their games, no, they have to put that away and go to school. That's a renunciation. When you go from one school to the next, then you're giving up your teachers, you're giving up some of your friends, and going to another place where you have to make new acquaintances. That's a renunciation. When you want to play sports, then you have to take care of certain things, your diet and exercise and things. That's a renunciation. You have to give up certain things that you wanted to do because this is more important. If you become a good student and you want to do well, then you have to give up so many things in order to become a good student. When you want to get married, that's a great renunciation to get married, because you're dedicating yourself to one person. And having to adjust in the beginning when the romantic motivation, then you don't think about these things. But suddenly you find one morning that, my God, I'm living with another person, and now I've got to adjust to them, and they have to adjust to me. And so that's a great renunciation. You have children, and that's a tremendous renunciation. You can't be the same person you were, the carefree person that you were. You've got children to take care of. That's a great renunciation. And so renunciation is at the heart of life. And eventually there's the great renunciation that all of us are called to, and that's called death. None of us can avoid it. We're all called to death. When everything that we know, everything here is taken away from us. And so if we know that, then we know that no, renunciation is at the heart of life. So it's not some big scary thing. It's what we're doing already. But let me move in a way so that begins to become more natural, part of my way of thinking. Then I see life itself in terms of that. And so then what let me conclude on this point on the vijnana. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that after the attainment of knowledge, the knowledge of Brahman, the knowledge of the Absolute, that there's a higher state. And that is the state of what he called vijnana. That is where you see, he would give the analogy that when you're walking upstairs to the terrace of a house, like an Indian house or many Mexican houses in many parts of the world other than here, where the house has a flat roof, where there's a terrace on top of the house where you can walk upstairs to the roof and sit there. He said, in order to get to the roof of the house, you leave step by step behind and you come to the roof. But then once you get to the roof, you see that the roof is made of the same brick and mortar as the steps were made. And so when one attains to knowledge, one attains it by neti, not this, and renunciation of lower viewpoints until you have attained to the non-dual knowledge. And the whole world is left behind. But he said, then a higher knowledge comes when you return to the world and see that this is that same Brahman. Everything here is that same divine consciousness. Everything is just waves of Brahman, nothing but Brahman, all made of that same divine consciousness. So they see the world of forms, but not like we see it, as dull, dead, insentient matter. They see it as the divine being, infinite, blissful divine being. Everything waves of bliss, waves of consciousness, waves of infinity. And so Sri Ramakrishna said that that was the highest realization, the realization of vijnana, which is a higher non-duality. The non-duality which, the Advaita which Totapuri had attained to, Ramakrishna's teacher, was non-dualism as opposed to Maya. Maya was the realm of illusion which keeps you bound, and non-dualism was the realm of knowledge. And so you have to push against Maya. But there's a higher knowledge where you see that there's no Maya to push against. Everything is divine. There's nothing but divinity. There's no second thing like Maya, which is the realm of illusion. No, even this world of form becomes the playground of divinity, where everything is made of the same divine substance. So that vision of Sri Ramakrishna is what Swami Vivekananda made into his message. That is, if you read Swami Vivekananda's works, if you do a search on all of the 9 volumes of Swamiji's works, you find that there's only one place in all of those volumes, all of his letters and everything, only one place where he mentions the word vijnana. And there he means by vijnana the modern Indian meaning, dictionary meaning of science. He doesn't mean what Sri Ramakrishna meant by the state of vijnana. So if vijnana was Sri Ramakrishna's highest realization and the highest teaching that he had, and which he mentioned all of the time, wouldn't Swami Vivekananda, his messenger to the world, have taught vijnana? Oh yes, he did. He just didn't call it that. Everything that Swami Vivekananda was based on that realization of Sri Ramakrishna. The service of God in man, that's based on that. Seeing God in everything, that's based on Sri Ramakrishna's vijnana. His teaching, don't seek God, just see him, is based on that. His teaching that when you see a mother cat nursing its kittens, bow down and worship. For where there is love, there is God. And he says, literally believe that. And so that idea of vijnana is present in every teaching of Swami Vivekananda, and that is the heart of Sri Ramakrishna's realization, the highest truth. And so that message of Sri Ramakrishna is manifesting itself and revealing itself, and will continue for many, many centuries to do so. One of the evidences of an incarnation of God, it's said, is that their ideas begin to manifest of themselves. Whether someone teaches them or not, you find the ideas springing up like seeds that you didn't even know anyone had sown. But you find the ideas beginning to spring up. And that's what you see if you travel around the world and talk to people, as I have. You begin to see these seeds of ideas growing up everywhere. All over the world, I've seen that happening. These life-giving ideas. Yes, they're not dominant yet. If you look in the newspaper, you'll only see destruction everywhere. And that's not untrue. That's happening. Destruction is happening everywhere. But if you look more closely, you'll see everywhere these seeds of new life coming up. And so that is the future of Sri Ramakrishna. So we'll stop here. I won't take questions because it's already late, so let me give a closing prayer. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens, peace is in the sky, peace is on earth, peace in the waters, peace in the plants and the trees. The gods are peace. Peace is the nature of truth. All is peace, peace alone, peace. May that peace, real peace, be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe.